Okay, I'm going to get us started. Hello, I'm Shampa Biswas, Professor of Politics. We are recording this session. I will take up the screen exactly for a minute to welcome you to the first event in the programming for the Race, Violence, and Health theme that Whitman College has adopted for this year, and to invite you to participate throughout the year in our coverage of that theme. Please visit our website where all the programming is listed. You can also find Zoom links for the public events there. The theme, Race, Violence, and Health, emerged from a sense of urgency among many of us at Whitman to reckon with the history and present of racial violence and racial disparities in health that the pandemic and the ongoing protests have only put into relief. We are trying to think about the valences and triangulation of all three signifiers, race, violence, and health, as they work in conjunction to affect the lives of marginal groups around the world. On behalf of the coordinating committee of faculty, staff, and students who are organizing the events for this year, we invite you to think with us throughout this year about what is entailed in building anti-racist futures in our teaching, in our workplaces, in our structures of visibility, literally who we see and who we value, in our institutional policies, in our networks of family and friends, and in our own lives. All the work that is going on this year, including by the two students who will lead the panel today, comes from deep commitment. It is a labor of love that people have taken on because they care. And so we want you to care with us and labor alongside us. I hope we will see you often at these events in even these very busy times in our lives. With that, I'm going to yield the floor to Hannah and Aliyah, and I'm going to ask all the panelists to come on the screen. Hannah and Aliyah are indomitable student representatives from the Black Student Union who will introduce and moderate this panel. This is their panel and the agenda is theirs. The focus of the panel is on the experiences and imaginings of Black students at Whitman over time. Thank you and welcome again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a panel about Black life at Whitman. We have a great conversation planned, and I have a wonderful panel of successful, amazing Black alumni that we are very honored to be speaking with. Thank you all so much for joining us again. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we are inhabiting today is stolen. The land that Aliyah and I are currently residing on belongs to Walla Walla Cayuse and Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux for Denver. The number that Aliyah posted in the chat can be used to figure out exactly what land you're inhabiting. Lastly, Aliyah and I want to take this opportunity to collectively give 3 deep breaths to all the Black lives lost due to police brutality and violence rooted in the systemic racism. George Floyd, Elijah McClain, and Breonna Taylor are just 3 examples of those who no longer have this opportunity with them. We honor them now.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction, Hannah, and thank you for that space and to everyone for participating and standing in solidarity with us. We want to use this space as an opportunity to amplify Black voices, especially Black voices at Whitman. As Professor Shampa said, this work is under Whitman's new Race, Violence, and Health theme. So for all of those who are involved, thank you for putting in this work and helping to move Whitman towards an anti-racist institution with anti-racist values. Before continuing forward, let's start with introductions. My name is Aliyah. I'm a junior from Denver and an environmental politics major. My favorite pastime is gardening.
My name is Hannah, and I'm a junior from Portland, Oregon, with a double major in art and Hispanic Studies. And my favorite pastime is drawing. Now we can pass it off to our amazing panelists. Please give us your name, your graduated major, current job, and your favorite pastime.
I'm Steve Hammond. I graduated in '79, born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and I currently reside in Sterling, Virginia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cherokee Washington. I graduated in 2017. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm working right now well, I'm a student, I'm a grad student. I'm in a program at McGill University, but I'm also working through the university as a TA. And favorite pastime, I have so many, but beach volleyball probably when the nets are back up after COVID.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wanjiru Kamau-Rutenberg, and I am currently in Tiwi in Kenya, off the coast of Kenya. I am in the class of 2001. Actually went to high school in Denver, Colorado, so there's a Denver connection happening here. And my favorite pastime, I knit and I rabble rouse.
That's awesome.
I got to chime in and say my favorite pastime right now is family history and genealogy. That's where my passion is right now.
Shout out to y'all from Denver. But thank you all again for your time and for those introductions. Hannah and I want this to be a space that allows for understanding and active listening to each other, whether on the panel or not. Hannah and I have written up a series of topics and questions that have been very relevant to our own Whitman experiences, and we know that they were probably a part of yours as well. And so we're going to dive into that. We will also have a portion allotted for questions from those who are viewing right now, but please wait to type them in the chat until that time.
Our goal for today is that everyone understands that the Black experience at Whitman and in any space is very different than our counterparts. And we want to remind everyone to keep your answers no longer than 2 minutes, but please feel free to speak your mind. And we don't want this to only be a Q&A, but a conversation. So if you have any questions for us or any other panelists, please feel free to share. This is your space as well.
Yes. So before we transition into those questions, do you all have any thoughts moving forward? Anything you want to say now? Okay, perfect. So our introductory question is, how have your experiences as a Black student at Whitman shaped your life after Whitman? We want to know what lessons that you learned and how you put those lessons into action going into the workforce and just leaving the Whitman community.
Do you have a preference on how we want to go?
You can start.
Well, when I graduated from Whitman in '79, I actually couldn't get away from the college fast enough. My experience at the college was mixed in terms of, the education that I had and the experiences that I lived through while I was there. And in '79, I actually had a job waiting for me when I left. I started working for the U.S. Geological Survey. And that turned into a 40-year career for me, but I actually could not move away fast enough. What I didn't realize as a part of that was that Whitman actually prepared me for going into a white science organization. And so I spent several years dealing with, how I fit into this as a minority professional in a science organization, and how do I manage this? And I tell you, looking back on it now, Whitman prepared me for dealing with being in the room with not many faces like myself, being, who's going to advocate for me, and how do I advocate for myself? And then how do I turn around and try to give back to the organization in which I, come from in terms of Whitman as well as the USGS, to try to put people on my shoulders to make it a better place. And so I think over the course of time, it, took me about 10 or 12 years before I realized that if I want Whitman to be a place that's for everybody, I got to be part of that change. And so that began to get me to start to think about, how do I get involved? What kinds of things do I need to be doing? And what kind of position do I need to put myself in to do that? And that's one of the reasons why I began to get active with volunteerism with the college. And ultimately today I'm sit on the board of trustees. And so my goal is to try to have an impact by sitting amongst the trustees of the college and interacting with students on a regular basis to try to make Whitman a better place and to continue to move us toward a more diversified campus.
Yeah, I think just echoing what Steve just said, Whitman prepares us to just go out into the world and be Black. having navigated that white space for so long. I transferred to Whitman halfway through, so I got there my sophomore year. So I didn't have the full Whitman experience, but even in those 2.5 years I was there, it was really tough. I'm sure we'll get into some other stuff later where I'll share some more about that experience, but it is not a space that's built for brown and Black people by any means. We can go into the history of it through like Stamp from the beginning, all the way back to the Puritans, to, you know, all the deep, dark things about these white institutions. But I think, like Steve said, it definitely prepared me to go out into the world, not only having learned how to speak my truth as a Black woman, but just how to navigate white spaces, how to work hard. I'm not afraid to do things. Whitman is really tough academically. And, you know, some people have an easier experience than others, but I wrote 2 theses. I double majored in psychology and rhetoric. So I had a lot of academic work to do. I played volleyball, so I had a lot of things going on, but I think in the end, it prepared me, even in those 2.5 years, to just be fearless and go out into the world and know that I can do whatever I set my mind to, you know, with some limitations, of course, but especially as a Black woman, it definitely taught me how to speak my truth, how to not be afraid, and how to just, like, you know, be in spaces and be confident in what I can offer. And I think a little bit more, pragmatic's not the right word, but I guess a direct line in terms of jobs and like career paths. I'm in a grad school program right now at McGill University studying sports psychology. And so with my experience as an athlete at Whitman, that was a direct line and experience that like taught me that we have to make these spaces, like Steve said, more colorful and diverse. So I'm the only Black person in my program of 7 people. And it's a Canadian program. So it's, you know, different sociological implications and such than here in the States. But yeah, it was an experience that, you know, landed me where I am today in terms of career and life goals. So lots of lessons, good lessons, bad lessons, but I think speaking my truth is the biggest one I learned.
Very much like what Steve and Cherokee have said, Whitman was very much a place that prepared me to exist in white spaces. You get used to being the only, what they've said, you get used to being the only one of your kind in a room. And that sets you up for other rooms that you're going to be in. Similar to Cherokee, after Whitman, I went into graduate school, went into a PhD program in political science at the University of Minnesota, where again, I was one of the only one. It was interesting for me because I was at Whitman as a Black student, but also as an African immigrant. I did go to high school in the US, and so I had lived in the US as a Black person, which is a very particular kind of experience. But I think it's important to honor that there's a breadth to Blackness, and the Black experience also in certain cases includes African immigrants, Black immigrants, and that's not often the immigration conversation and who is expected to be an immigrant in the US doesn't look like me. And so that was an interesting kind of intersection and navigation that I also had to add to my Whitman experience. And so in a lot of moments, that's not often factored into the conversation, the broader American conversation, and perhaps the Whitman conversation about what support do immigrants need. That said, I really do have to say that in important ways, Whitman made me who I am. That the experience at Whitman made me who I am. It made me more analytical. I had, and we'll talk about this perhaps later, I had opportunity to be an activist, to sharpen that skill, to sharpen that movement building skill, to grow it and then sharpen it over my time at Whitman. And I think that has led into the career that I've pursued after my graduate degree. I was in academia for a couple of years, for about 5-6 years, and then left academia to go into a life of a bit more kind of active changing the world from a different place. And something else that I got out of Whitman that has stayed with me is the skill and the ability and the value for close connection, for building connection with others. For others who look like you, for others who don't look like you. I also this sounds trite, but in important ways, I became Black at Whitman. I built connection with African Americans and understanding that when I was walking around downtown Walla Walla, anyone stopping me wasn't trying to ask, are you an African immigrant or are you, African American? And they looked at me, I'm Black. And so in important ways, I became Black at Whitman. And that was a really important political education for me. I have to say, I was reading your bio, Steve, and I saw that you were one of the founders of Mecca, the Mecca House. And I, many years later, was an RA of Mecca. And so thank you for that legacy. It was an absolutely, being RA of Mecca was very transformative for me because, again, it was part of that me growing into my Blackness, me recognizing that, yes, immigrant, but also Blackness that cuts across. So that was a really important part of my experience as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Mecca, I think, was an important part of my existence when we were here. I came in 74. The Mecca was actually established in 78 with a couple of other friends and myself, and it was really it serves kind of like the GAC does today. It was a place for people to go, and we had programming. And the big difference is that it was an interest house, so people could actually live there. And that created, I think, a chemistry that really helped to allow us to live and work together that I think was a benefit to a lot of folks that were there. The interesting thing that I've seen over the course of the 40 years since I've been, out of the college is how that has shifted. And now 40 years out, we've got the GAC on one end and we've got Mecca on the other end. And I don't see necessarily how all those pieces work together. It seems like the Mecca as it exists today is different than what we had intended it to be, 40 years ago. And it would be interesting to kind of go through and see, are there things that we can do to make those entities work better together, that can leverage the intentions of those activities and those, things that are going on that would be better for everybody.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And I also wanted to say, I actually lived in Mecca and so did Aliyah. So that's really exciting.
I kind of did.
The interesting thing is that the Mecca used to be where the music building is today. I don't know if you knew that, but they dropped the house. It was a huge, about 2.5-story house. It was a huge house, and they ended up dropping it and moving it where it is today. And it's much smaller. It feels like it's kind of, even though it's close to the commons, to me, having been in the other place, it feels like it's kind of just out in the boonies. Like it doesn't equate to the other interest houses that I think are on campus today.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. Again, want to just remind 2 minutes, but this is wonderful. Next question, let's talk about student activism and burnout. What were you involved as a student, and did you feel as though the work that you did paid off? And were there times where you chose complacency in order to survive at Whitman?
I know for me, I did a lot at Whitman. Some people watching may have been at Whitman when I was there, and that was a crazy, crazy time just politically. Trump was elected, there was police shootings and all kinds of crazy stuff, and ICE was coming to campus, and it was a mess. And even going into college was a time where You know, woke was becoming a thing and people were like, oh, now we have words to put to these feelings that we're having. And it was an interesting time. So I think what, like Wanjiru said, when I got to Whitman, I woke up to my Blackness in a different way, where I've been in white spaces my whole life academically, being in Los Angeles. I still went to a white private school. You know, I run in circles that are pretty white, you know, and just in general. But I think when I got to Whitman, there was so much going on. I couldn't ignore my Blackness and I had to put it forward before every piece of my identity. Just Black woman, that was it. Like I have a friend who told me that she never saw my Blackness questioned at Whitman. And I thought that was really interesting because you know, I just stood so firm in it. It makes sense, but I've never heard that, you know, even to be questioned on your Blackness. It was an interesting conversation. But in terms of the stuff that I was involved in, I was the first ASWAC diversity director under Arthur. I don't know if Arthur's watching, but he did a lot of really dope stuff. And I'm very thankful for him even creating that position. So that was really awesome. And then I was the co-director and first diversity coordinator for Whitman Teaches the Movement. And Susan, you may be on here, and Noah. And if you as students are interested, it's a really dope program. I would check it out. I was a BSU president briefly for one semester. And then I did a lot of activism through volleyball. So I was everywhere. I was at every protest I could be at. I was knocking on Kathy Murray's door, asking her for Black Lives Matter statements. I was doing all kinds of stuff, anything activist-wise, I was probably there and in your face about it. And in terms of complacency and just like taking a break, I was having a conversation with another friend, and I'll keep this short, but we were talking about just activism burnout in general. And she's mixed, she's Mexican and white. And she was saying, you know, as someone who's new to the movement in terms of Black Lives Matter and being a non-Black person, she's experiencing activism burnout. And she was like, I hope you don't experience that. Like you know, we can't all go forever and the resistance is great, but like, you can't keep that up. And I was like, well, we kind of have, and we have to as Black people, right? Like we don't have a choice. It's unfortunate. And, you know, we need to take a break and take care of ourselves. But even in the 2.5 years I was at Whitman, I never stopped. Whether it was volleyball, in the classroom, in a rhetoric class, I was telling people, I walked out of a class once because someone told me racism wasn't real. And I was like, I can't even get my studies done and, you know, not be faced with this. Like, that's crazy. But I'm really thankful to have had that experience as a Black woman and be so in the forefront and in people's faces with my friends. So I think the activism burnout is super real. Complacency is a word I don't even know, like, who is she? I don't know her because I don't have a choice, you know? So I was involved in quite a lot, but I'll leave it at that.
When I look back at my time at Whitman and, you know, kind of as a continuum, I feel like I'm at Whitman now since I'm back a lot. So, I mean, this has been a big continuum for me, but when I was a student there, I didn't feel like an activist. You know, I arrived there in '74, and, you know, what I didn't realize at the time is that I was part of a wave that the college at the time actually was trying to recruit more Blacks. So you recall the BSU statement of demands in terms of trying to increase the number of African Americans on campus. I was a benefit of that first wave. You know, here we are in 71-ish when that came out. And so, you know, I was amongst the first wave of people that actually, you know, was part of trying to increase that number. So when I was here, we probably had the largest number of Blacks that the school has seen. And so we lived in an environment that might have felt different than perhaps some of the rest of you, but at the same time, it was still very isolated. That's what's really so amazing about this, is despite the fact that we had this raft of folks that, you know, we interacted together, we did things together, we supported each other, it was still felt very isolated. The other thing that I would say is that I poured myself into my schoolwork because I didn't feel like I had a lot of support, you know, in terms of my studies. Only Black person that was doing geology. I wasn't a part of support groups there. So I was just trying to get out of school. It took me 5 years to get out of there. So, you know, I was really focused on trying to get out. But as I can think about this continuum of activism, clearly the Mecca was a part of that in terms of how do we start to try to make a change and make a difference in how we think about people and that kind of thing. I would also say activism occurred as I've become a volunteer. I was originally voted on to become on the board of overseers, and that immediately just set off bells for me. Here I am going to sit on the board of overseers for the college. And so I began, we started having conversations about how do we change the name of the board. I didn't like overseers. I didn't like what it meant. I didn't like what the implications were. Although the people that were part of that volunteer organization, which is probably 70, 80 people who support the college, really their passion was about supporting the college. And the overseers was an antiquated title that this group had. So we've ultimately, over the last several years, been able to change the Board of Overseers to the President's Advisory Group, which I think is very positive. And then I think moving from the Board of Overseers to the trustees has also been a part of an activism component of my life in terms of how do you get to a position where you can be at the table and have conversations that can try to make a difference.
Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting segue right from that title overseers to me, who is a relatively new member of the President's Advisory Board, who joined the President's Advisory Board and very eager to not be an overseer. I want to thank you again for that legacy. And I just feel like a lot of a theme of what's coming is like, there's a legacy theme here. There's a piece around building upon the work of those who came before. When I was, during my time at Whitman, of course, Mecca was a big part of my junior year in particular, being RA, and I was RA for the full year. I think we could have a whole conversation about Mecca, and I'm so curious now about the Mecca that you created, the Mecca that I was RA of, and the Mecca that Cherokee lived in, and that Aliyah Hannah know currently. And I was RA'd in a smaller Mecca. I wonder if it's still the same house. I'm not quite sure.
I think
it's kind of got a Japanese courtyard. Is that the same one? I think it was like a Japanese style house that then courtyard in the back. Really interesting. Anyway, but for me, probably my biggest piece of activism when I was at Whitman, the home of my engagement was the Multicultural Office. I'm not sure if it's still called the same thing, but I remember from when I was a student that was flown in, and I don't know if they had that when you were there, Steve, or Cherokee, or if they still have it, but flying in students, diversity students. Oh, someone's saying the new house used to be the Japanese house. So that's interesting, the new Mecca use. So there's a Japanese theme, at least, and that's a house I was aware of. Anyway, the Multicultural Office at the time, I was hired in there, and when I flew in to see Whitman, and that was an initiative that definitely helped in recruitment. Because they flew me in to see Whitman, I signed up. And so I don't know if that's a tool, and maybe we can have a conversation about how we're doing with recruitment, but that's a tool that made a difference for me, at least, in seeing the space and saying, oh, I can see myself here, made a big difference. And I negotiated my internship or my work-study experience during my fly-in. And so I worked at the Multicultural Office from my first day at Whitman to my last day at Whitman. And being part of that, doing a ton of programming. I don't know if anyone participating would remember the tunnel. There was work that we did that was called, there was a project that was called the Tunnel, and you would take students through this curated experience and then have a retreat around, the Tunnel of Oppression it was called, and have a whole retreat around and it was to help students who may not have experienced some of the things some of us were experiencing, process and work through what have those experienced, what they had experienced over the weekend, and really build a ton of empathy. I felt that was a powerful program for white students for sure, but also for us, for Black students, for students of color. And then there's a question about complacency. I think that I'm afraid that because I did get burnt out after 4 years of driving hard. And so I was super active in Mecca and then the Multicultural Office. And I was president of the International Students Association for a while then. We used to put this big ball together. I did get burnt out. And I remember when I left Whitman saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend my body and my spirit like this. And some of it is because on one hand, Whitman created an incredibly safe space for me to sharpen and strengthen muscles around activism and movement building that I use to this day. It was a safe space to do that. I also don't think any of what I did made a difference. I worry it didn't. Like I came, I spent myself, probably did some bits of damage. No, not some, and not probably, did bits of damage to myself. And I'm not sure that I can sit here and say, and this and this and this are the things I can point to that my student activism resulted in. I really envy you, Steve, that you can point to Mecca and say, I left this standing. But my concern for students there now is the things I have learned, and I learned because I was at Whitman and have had that experience of going, I'm not sure we changed anything, is I don't want to spend myself if it's not for real systemic change. Like, I want to, I read something the other day that says it's no use being at the table if you can't change the agenda. Yeah. If you're at the table and you can't change the agenda, you've just been co-opted. And that was such a powerful statement. And I'm thinking a lot about my own work right now, where, and I've dropped out of a couple of boards. I don't want to be at a table just so that it can be said Wanjiru was there, or we got a Black woman there. Like, I'm really paying attention to, am I being co-opted, or what's my opportunity to change the agenda here? And I didn't have a sharp enough sense of that when I was at Whitman. And institutions, especially white legacy institutions, are very good at co-opting. They find it very easy to keep you busy and to spend your time. Being able to look up and say, this is what I delivered, that's harder to do.
Can I chime in there for just a second? I think you're right on it. I think, you know, when we're students, we don't recognize what the future looks like, and we don't think about this 4-year chunk. We think we can get it all done. And when I look back on my time there, I felt like, man, where did that time go? And when I interact with students now, there's so much energy, there's so much heavy lifting that's going on during the 4 years that you're there. And activism and change is got to be for the long haul. And so when you're there for short chunks of time, it seems like things aren't changing. But the truth is the ball is advancing, but it just doesn't advance. You don't see it fall off the table, you know, while you're there. I mean, the fact that we had Mecca while I was there, I mean, that was a big deal because it was a physical change. But I would offer that if you start to think about things in the long haul, I would turn around and say, you know, look at the number of Black students that have been recruited over the course of the 40 years that I've been there. And I've had talks with, you know, seniors in the geology department where I show graphs and stuff. And the college has done very little to try to increase those curves. But at the same time, I think that there's been some small incremental shifts that have tried to make a difference, but they're not sustained. And to me, that's got to be the key, is how do we sustain these conversations so that we make a difference in the long haul.
Absolutely. And I think what I definitely want everyone to take out of this conversation is just like, this is a movement, not a moment. And it's going to take a lot of time and energy to progress. And even though, and Hannah and I have talked about this also, even though we might not be able to see if what we're doing now is making a direct impact, hopefully in the long run, we'll be able to look back and see that. And I think that that makes it worth it. And where we're at in this conversation is a great turning point to the next question, which is on the note of lifting as we climb and moving forward year after year. I'm wondering if you all have been keeping up with any of the more recent student activism that's been happening on campus, or just your thoughts on how student activism has evolved from your time at Whitman to what you see now, or anything that you've heard. And Hannah and I can definitely give examples of that if you need.
I can chime in just really quickly. I have a lot to say on this, but I'll keep it short. I'll try to. But I'm not super connected to a lot of students at Whitman right now, but those I am connected to have been sharing different pieces of what's been happening, and it hasn't changed. They're still fighting. You guys are still fighting for the same things that we fought for. You know, we changed the mascot when I was there. Certain things were in place. Certain things did change immediately, but I still have not seen an immediate change. But Whitman is still trying to be an anti-racist institution and call itself an anti-racist institution. And that's not to discredit the work that is happening behind closed doors. It's not to discredit those of you, students of color, and even Champa and everybody who's doing the work, and those of us who, as alumni, who are trying to do this work. But I'm having the same conversations with my high school, where Whitman cannot call itself an anti-racist institution until it is changing things immediately for you guys right now. Like, I haven't seen a change. And I've been working with a group of alumni from the volleyball team. And we came in and, there's a Black girl named Sydney on the team right now. And we came in to kind of support her, and she brought up the Black Lives Matter issue, and it was around the time of George Floyd, and she called the team. She was like, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And so I reached out to her, and we ended up all, connecting. And then the alumni that I'm, coordinating with, we ended up having a collaboration between the team to write a statement, to put in some anti-racist curriculum within the program in the athletic department. So we were doing some direct, tangible, concrete things that could be put in place right away, immediately leading into the fall, but it got co-opted, right? So I think, like everybody was saying before, there's this thing of co-opting that happens where you guys are doing the work, we are doing the work. And like Steve said, like, this is a movement of the youth. Like, we as millennials and, everybody's doing this work collectively, but we are on the front lines with everyone, and we are in these institutions, like, ready to make changes. And you guys are putting this panel together, and, we had a whole team of athletes, women and women of color, and 2 of the 3 Black women within the entire volleyball program were ready to make a change, and it got co-opted and shut down. So, and even on that note too, just to add one more thing, like this idea of just, there's so many students like you guys doing so much work, and it's not, I don't know if it's taken seriously by the institution, and that's not to, again, speak poorly of Whitman, but I really question whether or not they're listening to you all. And I'm even seeing, these Instagram posts, I don't know if anybody's seen them on the Whitman Athletic site, where they're using Black faces and Black teams to do this performative allyship, and not to make it a negative thing or like, put any sour energy into this, but somebody sent me a picture and it was my face, and it said Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I'll just share this last piece too. I knelt when I was at Whitman. So that was a big stink with my coach, and we had this whole conversation, and it was a really hard experience that's driven me today. But for them to even not take a step back and think, oh, let's share the history of the athletes who have done protests, and then use their faces to say Black Lives Matter. Like, I've knocked on Kathy's door before and said, hey, can we have a statement that says Black Lives Matter? And she told me no, because we had to stay impartial to what was happening. And then we just got a letter last week that said all Black Lives, or whatever it said, Black Lives Matter in all caps. So I have a little bit of a hard time answering this without emotion, I guess. And it's not, again, to put negative energy into this, but I see the work that you all are doing and I hear the work and it's the same thing over and over and over again 4 years later. But when we actually give tangible, options and solutions to change these things, it's not taken seriously. And then they post our Black faces, the basketball team got posted, my picture got posted, and thank God the volleyball team told them to take it down. But it was straight up just my face in a sea of other teams. And for that to even come out after I had knelt and was treated the way I was treated, and then they post one of the women's soccer team who knelt alongside me, they're not thinking. So I don't know if it's intentional. I'm not really sure. I want to assume best intentions, but the impact is, I'm seeing it as an alumni now who is deep in this anti-racist work, and now I'm understanding things differently, even reading and understanding like theory and just like our ancestors and the way that they fought for us. I don't know. I think Whitman needs to take a really hard look at itself. And Steve, I don't know if you want to speak to that since you're on the board, but I see you guys and I affirm the work that you're doing.
Thank you. And that means a lot. Before we move on to Steve answering that question, I want to say to anybody who's viewing, if you want to start putting your questions in the chat so that Hannah and I can go through them and pull out the ones that we're going to ask, that would be, now's the time to do so. And yes, Steve, if you want to take it away.
I'll just start with a couple of things that I see as perhaps changed or have have been more prominent since I was here, and then I'll come back to what you were saying, Cherokee. Talk about that for a minute, and that is I see more student organizations that are active. I think that there's a higher level of interest in activism and affinity groups that are finding ways to pull together to deal with issues that are of common interest to them. I think that's really important to do, and I think it's impressive to see that going on. The challenge becomes sometimes there's so many groups, it's hard to know how you engage with all the things that you kind of associate with. So that becomes a challenge. I think there's a decrease in complacency. I think people, the patience is waning here. And I think that kind of leads into what I'll say in a minute. I think there's an increased expectation in the college in terms of what we think we can do and push us further than we think we can, because I think that we have the opportunity to do that. And I think there is a huge increase in social media use. You all are all over this stuff. And it's really impressive. I feel like I do pretty well, but, back in the day, that isn't where we were communicating. So it took longer. The time steps for moving were a little bit longer simply because you're dealing in real time. And that's really impressive. The thing that I was going to say to add on to Cherokee's comments was, I think we're at a tipping point here in the country and on the campus. And I think that there is a great opportunity here for us to move the ball down the field, advance the ball, whatever we want to call it, to try to help make some difference. But I would also say that is not just upon the Black people on campus. It belongs to everybody. It belongs to the administration, it belongs to the trustees, it belongs to the faculty, and it belongs to students. And we recognize that this isn't an easy space to navigate, but we really owe it to one another to work together to get there. Granted, there are going to be a ton of pinch points that make it uncomfortable, but we have got to get better at navigating this space so that we can do it. And I'm confident, seeing some of the things that are happening and some of the action items that are a part of the new Inclusion Task Force report, there are places to start and to begin to put stakes in the ground to say we can move the ball forward from here. So let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
If I can just chime in on this one. In an interesting way, I kind of feel, and I wonder if part of it is generational also. I do feel torn on one hand with, I think it's important for us to recognize something really important. This is the first time that Whitman is being led by a woman, and not just any old woman, a queer woman. That's a huge shift, I think, for the culture and the history of the college. And the board chair is a woman. First time ever. And so the college is having a bunch of firsts, and I honor that, I recognize that, I honor that, and we need these women to succeed, right? Like, it cannot be that the history of Whitman is told that the moment when the college was led by women, it faltered, it failed, whatever. And they're trying to lead the college during a pandemic. And so I, as a feminist, I have a lot of time for that moment. And for the moment in history that we are at as a college. At the same time, I also am like, we can't keep students busy on the same things today that I was busy at, and that Steve was busy at in 79. It's stupid. And I also recognize Whitman is really good at history. Whitman honors its history, whether it's naming buildings, recognizing its moments of history. Why is it that Whitman's Black history is so hidden? Mm-hmm. That doesn't make sense to me. Why is it that the unpaid labor of so many Black and other people of color in trying to challenge these issues has remained hidden? And why is it we keep telling the story of Whitman as Whiteman College and batting it off as if it's okay? It's and saying, oh, it's not okay and we're working towards it. It's not enough anymore. And I share the impatience of you guys and Cherokee who came after, you know, like, I'm 01, you're 2017, 16 years later. Like, I share your impatience. Like, what the heck? So if we're in an institution that's so good at honoring its historical journey, why can't we fix this? And part of my thinking is also, listen, we're in a pandemic, everyone's doing school online, or majority of school online. A big reason I've heard for why more students of color and more Black students in particular don't come to Whitman is it's in Walla Walla in the wheat fields. Well, guess what? We now have a moment where Whitman ought to be saying, you don't have to worry about wheat fields. Our value add is, and my vision for it is, why Whitman ought to be producing the next 10, 20, 50 Ta-Nehisi Coates, the next thinkers, the next writer, the next academics of the Black experience, the colored experience. That's not beyond Whitman's grasp. It's not. And so for me, that mix of impatience, but also optimism and frustration is also what I channel into my post-Whitman years with serving on the President's Advisory Board and being engaged in a conversation like this. I don't want to just be frustrated and walk away. I'm frustrated, but I'm like, and I'm here. But there's also, and let's be honest, a culture of niceness and a culture of not calling things out. If you make noise, you're not playing by the rules. And I think part of being an anti-racist institution for Whitman, the hardest thing, and I'm seeing some comments from people, oh, what can white people do? Drop the act of when people of color or any minority has a question or pushes back or says something that sounds really, really harsh, don't try and force us to be nice. Because and if we can adjust that culture of Whitman of always trying to be nice rather than productive, nice isn't always productive. And we, I think, confuse from a culture perspective, nice for impactful. Often impact doesn't come out of niceness. And there has to be cultural space in how we have this conversation that I think it's going to be a journey. I don't want to go through all the coding, all the code. cultural cues before I can say what I really want to say. And I really would love us to move past that. And I think that I'm really excited for this, for seeing especially alumni of color that I've never connected with in the past, because I think we're at a moment where we are telling a history of Whitman's alumni of color. Whitman isn't Whiteman College. Whitman has produced amazing alumni of color who've gone on to do awesome things and who, while they were there, did things on campus. And I think we need to start shifting that narrative and seeing Black people, seeing the Native peoples, seeing the Hispanics, seeing the queer people who've come through Whitman and telling their histories as part of Whitman's history is a challenge. I did send off an email about when you look at the notable alumni, if you do a Google search on Whitman and look at notable alumni, I don't know who submits those, but Steve ought to be there.
Right. Just to chime in really fast on that note, I think, Wanjiru, you hit something right on the head where there's this piece of history that we have to acknowledge in order to be anti-racist institutions. Like, a lot of these schools don't want to look at their past. And I know it's a little bit more on like the academic side and it takes a long time to like dig into it, but if we're really going to talk about like Whitman as an institution being racist and or anti-racist in that framework, like I'm reading Stamped from the Beginning right now, highly recommended to anyone who hasn't read it. Let's talk about Whitman being a predominantly white institution and what that means back in the day and like where that came from in terms of like Cotton Mather and the Puritans and Thomas Jefferson and all these people who were hella racist, and we still have these institutions that are built on these white schools that were built way back in the day, like a Sarah Lawrence and a Harvard, and they all come from these very racist schools of thought that we have to dismantle. And like Whitman is a product of that. And we're obviously way better than, back in the day when we had, that kind of racism, and it still exists. But just because we are a liberal institution that's diverse does not mean that we can't face that history and like reconcile with it and then move forward, right? And Kathy Murray, like if you're on here, like I highly recommend you read Stamped from the Beginning and take a look at what that means for Whitman. Like as a president, and Wanjiru, I think you're right, like even to have a woman who is queer as our leader, even that, like we got to be able to be intersectional with this work. And like I'm also torn in that sense where she can still read Stamped from the Beginning with the board of trustees, and Steve, like you can lead that conversation and everybody can be part of it. But when are we going to look at our history as a white school and what that means going forward, right? And like that's a little bit of a call out, but like a productive call out where I hope everyone gets off this call and goes to read these books and such, because it's really important to understand our history, right? And like I
got to piggyback on that. I think it's so important to look backward in order to look forward, and that's a statement that I use around the board table all the time. That we need to know where we came from. So one, we stop making the same mistakes, and two, we can learn from those things so that we can power ourselves into the future. So I think what you're saying is just extremely important.
And if we're going to be a post-abolitionist is not the right word, but if we're going to move forward as an abolitionist like movement, like this is the revolution. We're here. This is it. Like this is the next iteration of what's been happening in the past. So we're not going to move anywhere until we reconcile with that history. So
absolutely. In the last few minutes that we have, those were all the questions that Hannah have prepared. We wanted to pass it off to one question from a viewer, Hannah chose it. And then after that, after you answer whatever that question is, I was wondering if you would just give one sentence of some words of encouragement to current BIPOC students right now. Any one piece of advice that you want to give to us. I know that for any student of color watching right now, we can definitely take that away from you all. You all did what we're doing now. We're trying to move forward and we look up to you and we want to try to thrive instead of survive right now. And so we definitely want to hear those words of encouragement. So Hannah, I will let you read that question off.
So the question that I chose is, by Waco. At Whitman, there has been some change in terms of student activism through social media and such. I was wondering if you had any advice to how students can keep this momentum going so that when we go back on campus, we can start creating actual long-term changes.
I would say connecting to each other. I think part of when I was on campus and just doing the work I was doing and spending myself, it didn't occur to me, and this is both my fault, but the fault of the structures around me. It didn't occur to me to reach out to alumni of color. It didn't occur to, like we're not good at building intergenerational links across time. I didn't see alumni of color. And I apologize to you, Steve, but it wasn't part of and others. It wasn't part of the story of, I mean, when I was there, and maybe this has changed. When I was there, we were told Whitman is a white man college, and it was as if we were the first Black people there. And so we were building everything from scratch. And so for those of you who are on campus now, please, I'm seeing a lot of reaching back into the past to understand the experiences of those who came before. And I think, as Steve is saying, you gotta stand on the shoulders of those who've borne the weight before is a lot to be said. And I think that's a big fundamental piece of student activism that I'd love to see, you know, us doing differently. And it's not just, I'm not putting the burden on students there now, I'm putting the burden actually on alumni. Those of us who are alumni of color, to reach back and get engaged, but also on the administration to find ways to connect us, because ultimately the college is what we all have in common. Plus, I also have another vision. I'm just gonna speak this out. I think there is this assumption that Whitman alumni of color can't raise money for the college. And Whitman really values its alumni for their ability to raise money. And so to the extent, if there are any other alumni of color listening into this, I think our ability to mobilize dollars, and I know I haven't been as motivated because I've been waiting for someone to give me a social justice thing to engage with, because that's what so animated me when I was there. If anyone from the development office is listening, give us something we can sink our teeth into in real ways. And for those of us who are alumni of color, when those opportunities emerge, let's actually show our financial might, because I hate to say it, but you know, the college values its alumni for their giving abilities. Sorry.
No, you're good. In the last 2 minutes, can Cherokee and Steve please just give us some words of encouragement? And then Hannah and I will wrap up.
Yeah, I think this movement is, in the spaces I've been in, we've been discussing as young people of color that this movement is, and I wrote it down, so I'm looking away for a sec, but this movement is collective, it's collaborative, it's improvisational, and it's creative. So I think we need to make sure that we are connecting, like Wanjiru just said, as alumni and current students. And you guys are doing this thing that's really hard in a pandemic. And I see you, I affirm you, I stand with you in solidarity. And keep speaking truth to power, because you're not crazy. And like you said, Aliyah, I used to say surviving versus thriving all the time. And you guys are doing it, but you don't have to survive anymore, because the time is now to speak truth to power. And if they don't want to hear it, then deuces. I don't know. Right. Bye. You know?
Three quick things. The first one is care for yourself. You have to take care of yourself. If you're not taking care of yourself, nobody else is. So the first and foremost, you have to work within the vessel that you have. So, you know, you got to figure that out. You got to create a support mechanism, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with the health unit or with others, but you have to take care of yourself. The other thing is I think working with faculty to help kind of create the curriculum that will help us grow will be very important as well. So I think that there's a role to play in terms of working with your professors in terms of how can we grow this. The other thing that I would have is, I tend to pick up on themes and stuff, and I came across this just the other day, and that is give the dream a wake-up call. So here we are thinking about where we want Whitman to be in the next 5 years. As a trustee, I'm thinking about the next 30 years. So how do we wake up our dream? Our dream is to make Whitman a better place. How can we jump into this? And I would say that with the recent task force report, there are some nuggets in there that are valuable, and we have to find a way to leverage those. So let's move forward. I would urge students and faculty and trustees and alumni to find a place in those spaces and engage in them, and let's, again, move the ball forward.
Thank you.
I mean, I want to echo what Cherokee said in terms of, I see you, I honor you, I value you, thank you. You are doing so much work on all our behalf. Thank you. I think I said a couple of other things about my vision for what I would love Whitman to see itself as, not just as Whitman College, but as the place that produces the next great thinkers of the Black experience and other experiences. I think everything in Whitman's DNA can produce that if there is intention in that direction. And yeah, the dreaming of Whitman could dream bigger and harder and higher for what it ought to be as an anti-racist institution. And it's not that hard to accomplish, I think, but also to us as alumni, reaching out to the students who are there now is going to be really important, but also starting to show our financial presence as alumni will probably get our voices amplified that much more. And then to the administration, give us the place to place our money, like interest us. The challenge,
great comment.
Interest us.
Great comment.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your experiences. Thank you for everyone who took the time to watch and listen and just, be here in the moment. I hope that you all take a moment to reflect on what you've heard today and keep amplifying marginalized voices. Remember, Black Lives Matter, and thank you so much, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks, you guys. You did a great job today.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all as women of color too. We see you. Work is hard and it always falls on us. So good on you. We see you.
Thank you. Yes.
Well done.